Hi everyone, it is Stephanie Medley-Rath, and I am the author of Introduction to Sociology and the founder of the Sociology Coach website. And I wanted to share with you some of the features or framework of my book. So first off, it is organized using the sociological literacy framework. I have a different video that talks about that in more detail, so I'm not going to go over it in more detail right now, okay? Um, Every chapter includes a focus on micro, meso, and macro, so you will find that throughout the book. What you're not going to find is conflict functionalist and symbolic interactionism forced into every chapter artificially, like you find in many or most introduction to sociology textbooks. It's really one of the reasons that motivated me many years ago to write my own book was that this three perspective framework seemed very forced into our curriculum. So instead, you will find conflict functionalist and symbolic interactionist in the book. They are used and introduced where they make sense. They are not forced into every single chapter. What you will find in every chapter is something about micro, meso, and macro, and you will see the key concepts from the sociological literacy framework. You're going to find those in every single chapter as well. I wanted to also talk about the paired topics approach that I have taken. So another one of my frustrations with textbooks is just the sheer number of chapters that are in some of these books, that it is impossible to cover all of the material that's usually presented in an introduction to sociology textbook. So I cut the number of chapters. Some of the chapters are still quite lengthy, but I did cut the number of chapters and I took a different kind of approach. So you're still going to see a lot of the topics that you're familiar with. They just might not be in a standalone chapter, but combined with other material in the book itself. And if I pull up the table of contents, so let me do that real quick. Let me go to the detailed table of contents. So if you go to the detailed table of contents, you see the chapters, and you're going to see how I've paired different topics. So that first chapter, you've got the sociological perspective, and it includes examples related to media and technology. In the chapter on using research methods, you're going to see information about family life as well. It's not going to cover everything that you are used to covering in a family chapter, but you're going to be able to give students an introduction to the study of families. And that's really the most important part, is that no one chapter should be like necessarily summarizing the entire field of sociology. That would be impossible, but giving students an introduction to it. The social structure chapter includes examples related to religion and the government. Culture is paired with socialization. Deviance is paired with crime, which I know that's not necessarily unusual, but I really want to make the point that deviance and crime are not necessarily the same thing, but they are paired together in this book. You're also going to see a separate chapter on stratification. And in this case, I started teaching a unit on stratification many years ago before I got into the chapters on social class, gender, and race, just to give students an overview of what we're talking about with stratification, and to help them understand that we're not just our social class, we're not just our gender, we're not just our race, we are all of these things. And that even when we are talking about one of these topics in greater depth, I wanted them to remember that, well, class matters. Class is not the only thing that matters, even though we're talking about it very deeply, perhaps. And if you open that chapter up, you're also going to see some of the key topics that would be helpful for understanding stratification more broadly. What is stratification? What is race, gender, and social class? So you're going to get some definitions, some of the structures, right? Because structure is a key concept in sociology. So you're going to get that as well. So let me jump back to the preface. Let's see, I mentioned the stratification chapter. There's also contemporary topics in this book. So first off, chapter 1 does talk about technology and the media. So we've got that in there, especially important when we think about all the different technological changes that may be taking place right now. Chapter 10 features climate change. I did hear from at least one reviewer when this book was with the publisher that they could never teach about the climate crisis with their students. And I promise you, if I can teach climate change in a public institution in Indiana, you can teach it anywhere else. Okay, so if I can do it, you can do it too. It is in chapter 10, which maybe will be helpful. Hopefully your students are trusting enough by the time you get to it. There's a focus on immigration and citizenship in a way that I think is a little bit more in depth than what you usually find in Introduction to Sociology textbooks. At the time I began drafting this book, I never envisioned just like how critical those topics would be in our everyday lives. So there's readings related to those topics. I've expanded the discussion of social class as well. We tend to think about it in intro as it's wealth and income and maybe social capital and occupation, but also the role of credit and debt, which again, I had a reviewer like, it's not an economics course. You're right, but, I might not have a lot of income or a lot of wealth, but if I got a really great credit score, that matters. So we're going to talk, a little bit about those things. There's information about gun fatalities in this book as well. Racial socialization. So like I said, every chapter includes those key concepts from the sociological literacy framework, and that includes socialization. So socialization is not just limited to an early chapter in the book and maybe the chapter on gender. Socialization comes up in all the chapters, and features of culture rooted in sociology. So, and I say that because you may see some ideas that you're not familiar with, because that's not what is in every single Intro to Sociology textbook. But I took the approach of what topics should be an introduction to sociology? What topics do I usually see in these textbooks? And then what are sociologists actually saying about these topics today in 2026? So it would have been far easier for me to just take someone else's textbook and kind of put a slight spin on it and make it my own. But I really did take a great deal of time and effort to see what is it that sociologists actually say about things like culture today, right? There's a whole subfield of sociology of culture. So we should be drawing on that and not just whatever was placed in a book 50 years ago and that just sticks around. So that's another approach, if you will, like including some of these contemporary topics that are important to our daily lives. So I think that is about covers what I wanted to cover in this video with, thinking about the topics and framework for this book. As always, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at thesociologycoach@gmail.com, or you can find me on social media. I'm happy to talk about any of these, topics. I'm happy to chat. So thanks.